Welcome back to Retro Rebound. In today's video, definitely not retro, we're going back to Elden Ring. Yeah, we're really going back in time for this one. Why are we doing that? Shout out to the Erdtree. Time to learn what Miquela's up to. Probably die 1,000 times in the process, but also Elden Ring has a special place in most of our hearts, right? The game that showed up, a partnership with George R.R. Martin, pretty much Dark Souls 4, disappears for a while, Jeff Keighley goes to gamer prison, then it shows back up, it looks marvelous, there's a jump button, good lord, a jump button, and then we have to have our expectations put in check. Is this actually going to deliver, and by God, does it exceed expectations and then some, making it one of the most special video games ever, a surprising success, and surprisingly landing itself in mainstream success, pushing past 20 million copies sold. There's no denying Elden Ring is an extremely special video game. But just like a game we recently talked about on the channel, Pokemon Legends Arceus, it's in that video I mentioned I became insanely nostalgic for that game quickly. Why is that? Because it was at a time when reviewing it where it changed the trajectory of Retro Rebound, all for the better, and it was our first ever Switch review. But then when Elden Ring, it was a unique review experience again, but this time it mingled in more with life itself. So for those who don't know my history, I've been reviewing games on YouTube since 2013 over on Mr. Matty Plays channel. A lot of those reviews have bled into this channel where it makes sense. But I've been doing that since 2013, so I've been really lucky to get a lot of games early and play them ahead of their launch, and as you've seen here before, just deliver my opinion when the embargo lifts, and who knows if the game's gonna be good or bad, and if people are gonna like or hate that, but that's just been my job, and I've been very lucky with that. But I've done that on my own for a while, and I prefer it that way. I try to keep to myself in an industry full of backstabbing and smack talking. It's like, you know what, I'm just gonna do my job here, and that's really it. But for the few friends I do have, at the same time I was reviewing Elden Ring, so were they. And it was this really unique experience of discovering the world together, and I hate to sound privileged here, but before really anyone else got to. There was so much to unpack in this world, and much of my review process is just checking myself the whole time, but then I could find something and see if someone else found something. It was a really, really unique review experience that I'll never forget. And so Elden Ring just brings back those warm feelings, even if I'm dying a lot, whenever I play it again. So like I said, I'm firing it up here because of Shadow of the Erdtree coming out in just a few short months in the middle of June. So I'm loving that FromSoft recognized the demand is there. This is probably one of the most anticipated DLCs ever. And they were just like, look, when we announce this thing, we'll see you in a couple months. And that is fantastic. I cannot wait to play that. So to warm myself up, I wanted to fire up Elden Ring. Now, not only that, but this is coming after Lies of P, which landed, by the way, in my top 2 for Game of the Year last year, only beaten out by Baldur's Gate 3. If you know my taste, then like that's pretty impressive for Lies of P to push above that. I'll get into why Lies of P is important in this conversation a little bit, but all the setup is done. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Retro Rebound. I hope you're doing fantastic. If you're into nostalgic and retrospective content, you're in the right place. Please do consider subscribing. Okay, let's start off at the top. This game sort of has the Pokemon effect, where when Pokemon introduces particular things into the franchise, it's really exciting for the core Pokemon fans, like, oh, in Legends Arceus, you can catch differently. But when you look at it on a broader scale, gaming as a whole, maybe what Legends Arceus did wasn't super impressive or a big deal. Elden Ring adds a jump button, it adds horseback riding. Many games have this, many games are built in with a jump button from the get-go. And I know technically the Souls games already had a jump button if you sprint and press the B or circle button, but this was a full-on dedicated jump button that was really first introduced with Sekiro, but this time in a Souls-like experience, not a deflection-focused game. This has a jump button, so there's more verticality, there's more open world exploration. That's the other thing. Elden Ring is an open world game. Is it going to be consumed by Ubisoft-itis where you have waypoints everywhere and quest markers everywhere? And no. The most impressive thing about Elden Ring, in my opinion, is that in the face of doing what is their magnum opus, where you feel everything they have built bleeding into this game, from Sekiro to Bloodborne to Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, all of them bleeding here right into Elden Ring, they never compromise one little bit, for better or for worse, like side quests, really tough to find a nice side quest in Elden Ring. And I'm not talking about putting quest markers down and letting me track them, but a journal or something would be fantastic, I think, at least to check that sort of thing, because the biggest frustration I had with Elden Ring was when a side quest expired and I had no idea why. Very, very annoying. At the same time, Elden Ring, with its lack of UI, its lack of direction outside of a glowing little golden light, just drifting in a particular direction that you may want to head in. Otherwise, you're completely on your own. The world is dangerous. The world does not have the same open world fodder and content that you've come to know and maybe abhor. This is a totally different ball game, and the fact that it found such success for being exactly what it is one of the most surprising things I have seen in gaming history. I love that Elden Ring thrived and performed well in the sales chart and that people really gravitated towards it. I'm just surprised that people really jived with it, even though it was uncompromising in its design philosophies dating back to Demon Souls. And that's what makes From Software a special developer, right? Even when they're at the peak of their game, they bring out a game after Elden Ring, like Armored Core 6, they destroy you in that game. Like, they're not afraid to destroy your confidence because they know they got your money anyway. It's insane what they've been able to pull off. But enough about the developer feats. What's this game doing that makes it special? Scale. Firing this thing up and just looking at the scale and the architecture and the detail, the lighting, the particle effects, the weather. There's so much that goes into the visuals, the style of Elden Ring. Beyond your character, by the way, who has insanely sick armor, it just has a swagger to it. And as someone who has just recently started reading Berserk, which is clearly the inspiration of the entire Souls-verse, seriously, go look up comparison shots. It's insane how much Miyazaki borrows from this, but I think it's all good. Like, I think this is what great artists do because look what it's given birth to. But starting to read Berserk and seeing those connections, especially the Erdtree, oh my God, like, it's awesome. Now, by the way, for those of you who are Berserk lovers, I'm only on like volume 5, so just bear with me. I got a lot of work ahead of me. But nonetheless, this world is utterly captivating, almost frustratingly so in my experience. I brought up Lies of P earlier. One thing that captivated me with Lies of P was its world. And what I loved about it is there was a story being told there. After Elden Ring came out and I played it, I had not played a single Souls-like game until Lies of P, which was about a year and change later. I mean, I was satiated. I was fine. I wasn't really itching for a Souls-like. I was just curious if Lies of P was great. But what Lies of P did that's different from Software, and I hope From Software takes note of this and does this to elevate what their games do, is Lies of P told a direct story that elevated its world completely. One that I will not give you any details on other than saying, please go play this game, whether you buy it, play it on Game Pass, whatever it is. That game is amazing, and that ending is one of the best since probably BioShock. You should not have it spoiled for you. And when the sequel comes around, it probably will be spoiled for you, so get in while it's hot, folks. But anyway, Lies of P had a phenomenal story, in my opinion, and a fantastic ending. And that elevated an otherwise really competent, finely tuned Souls-like experience. With From Software, the reason I say their worlds are frustratingly engrossing is I want to learn about every character, every item, every building. Why were these things constructed? Why are things the way they are? And I've found that more and more they're leaning into the YouTuber explanations and the item description storytelling. Don't get me wrong, games like Sekiro did have more directed storytelling, and I think that's great. I'm not saying that From Software has to hold our hand through this, but I would really love to see them do what Lies of P did, which is strike a balance between the occasional cutscenes with context that build the world and build the story at the same time as staying ambiguous, kind of a little bit of mystery to make you want to peel back those additional layers behind the forward-facing story. I think From Software can totally do that. I get they have a reputation to uphold, and I totally respect that there are many of you out there who think I'm out of my mind for suggesting this. But after playing Lies of P, it's really hard to say that what From is doing is technically like what I would call the right thing. It's definitely unconventional, it's different, and many people love that about their games, but I feel like there's a way to have that puzzle piece mentality of the story design still there while also telling you something that's happening here. So I just love the worlds they build, but quite frankly, outside of Bloodborne, I don't know if I could really tell you anything about them. They're full of some of the most grotesque creature design, craziest bosses you'll ever see, some of the most twisted, warped enemies that'll beat your butt, no problem. And who cares sometimes who they are? Because you'll see hands crawling towards you, giant hands. You'll see giant squids that are formed together in a gooey ball. You'll see some sickening things here, dude, and it is awesome. Now, Elden Ring, again, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't really compromise in its boss design. I just recently fought Godric in my New Game Plus run. I'm doing a bleed build from when I was originally playing the game after I had retooled my entire kit, because I started off as like a cleric. I was doing a lot of light magic, and that helped a lot, by the way, in the final boss, I'll just say. So I got lucky that I was building in that direction. But then all the people online were saying like bleed build is mad easy. And I thought, you know what? I beat the game this way. I've earned the bleed build. Plus, my boy Fighting Cowboy had a fantastic build, which I'm sure you're recognizing because I think I even copied it down to the armor. And I pulled this thing out. Some of the bleed spells that you get in this game are insane. Now, part of my skill issue, because that's why I wanted to get the fingers warm, because a game like Lies of P, even though they feel the same in the terms of Souls-like, plays very differently from something like Elden Ring, where as you can see, I'm going to be dodge failing a ton and getting, I didn't die, but just getting hit a ton. I probably would have died if I wasn't on New Game Plus, where my character was really beefed up past level 160. But the bleed build is exceedingly fun. And another thing I adore about Elden Ring is that for a game of its size and its scope, still multiple endings, still tons of build options. I mentioned my cleric, very light magic, very sword and shield based, so I love that approach. But then you can see here I'm a much more nimble bleed build, doing stacking bleed damage, which, oh my god, you can blow up some of your enemies with bleed damage, even after all of the nerfs. I mean, it was really bad at one point. And then Elden Ring introduces its own slew of new tools, as every FromSoft game does. Yeah, so there are these Ashes of War that you can use, special abilities, or there's summoning. Special summons. Oh, let's talk about mimic tiers, shall we? For those who have not played Elden Ring, there was a bit of a controversy around summoning in this game. If you summon, you're bad at it. Why do I say that? Because I saw it online, and guess whose friend group had the same issue? Mine. If you summon, you're bad at the game. And I was like, look, it's a tool for me to use. The mimic tier, was it busted? Yes. Did FromSoft put it in there? Yes. Did they nerf it? Yes. Did it still help me beat Godric? Absolutely. Can I still summon regardless of that? 100%. Do I summon multiplayer help? Sometimes my ego stops me there, I'll be honest. But when it comes to in-game summons, NPCs, dude, you're my meat shield. Let me cook over here. I got all the spells. I got all the tools. You just go out there and handle it. And like most FromSoft boss fights, outside of the one that you're going to be seeing with Godric, in my experience, every summon I have ever brought into the battlefield when I was reviewing the game died at least a quarter of the way into the boss fight. So it kind of is just like the training wheels getting you going, and they're off, and now you're riding the bike. And it's either sink or swim, or I guess ride or crash and like break your elbow pretty much. So Elden Ring has these summons. It was a controversy for many. I am pro summon, like go, summon, have fun. There are certain bosses that I think are demanding it. I think it's a big part of the game's design. There was this double gargoyle boss fight that was underground that was unbelievably hard for me, and I thought the summon was super necessary there. I probably would never have beat it without the summon. That was with Mimic Tier when it was at its best. Maybe it was a skill issue, but hey, I'm pro summon. And speaking of that underground area, that's another thing that I absolutely adored about Elden Ring. This has to be up there as one of the biggest open worlds of all time. Is it one of the most daunting? 100%. I remember when I was reviewing the game, I actually have it in my review footage. You'll find me going into a chest, teleporting, and I am just out in the middle of nowhere, all of a sudden stealthing in the grass, and there's trees walking around me. And then I found this elevator, and it led me underground to this massive new zone. The game continued to deliver, and the game I connected it to in my review, and it's still true to this day, is Skyrim. Not only does it have that classic game quality where you just know you're gonna come back to Elden Ring this year for Shadow of the Erdtree, you're gonna come back for any other expansions or DLC they do maybe afterwards. If they don't, you're still gonna come back anyway, because there's nothing quite like Elden Ring. But also, Elden Ring has impeccable visual design when it comes to map layout. After you beat Godric, you step out into really the true open world. Like, you think initially you've got this big open world zone, you're like, yeah, this is great. I love open world Souls-like stuff. Oh, No, once you go through those double doors and you see everything before you, from the academy to the Erdtree in the distance, that is like the North Star. You're constantly tracking down the Erdtree, trying to get more and more close to it. And it's like Skyrim in the mountains. Like, you see something in the distance and you just track it and you hit everything in between on your way. It's unbelievable to me that From Software's first open world was this game. Sure, they had open zones that were all interconnected, but to go from that to how open and sprawling Elden Ring was is truly mind-boggling, especially when you had to account for underground areas, above ground areas. Like, how do you top this is what I was left asking. Elden Ring is a phenomenal video game. For me and my personal taste, only topped that year by A Plague Tale Requiem, because that story to me is batshit crazy, and you gotta check it out if you haven't played A Plague Tale. So good. But when it comes to Elden Ring and its scale and its scope, it's the bee's knees. It is insane. Not only that, but the lack of compromise in quality and how many assets are poured into every area. Each biome feels different. There's snow biomes, there's swampy areas, there's very thick grasslands. There's just so much going on here. And also the sense of discovery that I mentioned earlier in the review process. Even now, you'll see one thing I discovered in the swamps. By the way, I personally never found this before, but when I was in the swamplands, I found this dude who had like iron fists, and he was telling me to bugger off. And I was like, no, I'm gonna keep bothering you, dude, because that's the trick in these FromSoft games, right? You keep talking and talking and talking, and eventually they'll give you something. This one was not cooperating, and I was not really willing to find the workaround here. So I took his ass out, and that was what was awesome about it, because he dropped some unique stuff, and that was probably a mistake. You know, I follow the rule of thumb that in these FromSoft games, you probably just shouldn't bother anyone until they finally speak to you and give you an item. You don't want to just do what I did here. But again, it's just so awesome that you can find these unmarked things, not really quests, that'll just deliver you good stuff. And it gives the world this sense of place, because you'll be wandering around and you'll just see someone and go, oh my God, is this person a friend or foe? And when you don't see, you're clicking the lock on button, you don't see it turn into like, you know, you can lock onto them and there's the health bar. Okay, it's a friend. Let's see what's going on. Let's talk to them. And sometimes the game surprises you with a trap. Like, it's just so well tested, so fine-tuned. They just know how the player is going to approach things. And even though we figured out a lot of like the little things that From Software does to beat us down, they still evolve. And it's again, just an unbelievable video game, truly. So it was good to go in there, get the fingers warm on the thumbsticks, and play a little Elden Ring, refamiliarize ourselves with this absolutely wonderful world that if you haven't played yet, a lot of people wonder, hey, is this a good first FromSoft game? I really do think with the summoning mechanic, it could be for you. I also recommend Lies of P, because that game does also have consistent summoning. It does have a more direct story, and it also isn't, in my case, I put like 108 hours into Elden Ring in my first playthrough. You don't necessarily need to do that if you're into something like Lies of P, which finishes ahead of 30 hours. So you can kind of pick your poison there. But I don't think Elden Ring is the worst suggestion, because it has so many modern design sensibilities in its map layout, jump button, things that were missing that made Souls-like games a little more archaic, but in this fun, more deliberate way. I do think are solved in Elden Ring, where if you've been holding off, you know, you're looking at Shadow of the Erdtree, I mean, really, this is a special game that you should at least give a try to, because Skyrim's one of my top games ever. I don't compare any games to Skyrim. I compare games laughably to Skyrim, maybe. Like, I think of a game that I have a soft spot for, like Dragon Age Inquisition, where they definitely looked at the hinterlands and went, oh yeah, like Skyrim's pretty great, let's try that. God almighty, like, there are games that try to be Skyrim or evoke that quality. I do think Elden Ring is the only one that has matched that level. And you know how I feel about my Bethesda game studio, so I'm just saying, give it a shot. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Retro Rebound. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on Elden Ring and what you're thinking about the upcoming Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Fire away down below. Other than that, I will catch you in the next Retro Rebound. Peace out.